In the middle of the California desert, in one of the hottest and driest corners of the American Southwest, there is a vast body of water that should not exist. It is the largest lake in the state, a sea in the desert, a shimmering expanse of water surrounded by parched, sun-baked land where rainfall is almost non-existent. This is the Salton Sea, the strangest lake in America, and nearly everything about it defies expectation and even belief. It was not supposed to be there. It was not carved by nature over the ages, not fed by great rivers, not a natural feature of the landscape at all. And now, in its slow and troubled decline, it is doing something that seems almost impossible, revealing a series of paradoxes and dangers and hidden treasures that make it one of the strangest and most consequential places in the country. The Salton Sea has done something that shouldn't be possible, and understanding exactly what it did and why reveals a story unlike any other in the country. In this video, we are going to unravel the impossibilities of the Salton Sea, one by one. We are going to explore its bizarre accidental origin, a sea born of a human blunder in the middle of the desert. We are going to see how the accidental sea became an unlikely paradise, and then how it began to die. We are going to confront the great paradox at its heart, the way that the shrinking sea becomes more dangerous as it disappears, unleashing toxic dust that threatens the health of the entire region. We are going to understand how the sea poisons its own waters, growing so salty that it kills the life within it. We are going to uncover the astonishing fortune in a critical mineral that lies beneath the dying sea. And we are going to consider the human stakes, the communities that bear the consequences, and the impossible challenge of what to do about it all. Stay with us, because the Salton Sea is one of the strangest and most consequential places in America, and what it is doing right now truly shouldn't be possible. To grasp the strangeness of the Salton Sea, you first have to understand its bizarre and improbable origin. Because the very existence of this great desert lake is the first thing that shouldn't be possible. The Salton Sea was not created by nature in the ordinary sense. It was born of an accident, a mistake, a catastrophic failure of human engineering. In the early part of the 20th century, efforts to divert water from the Colorado River for irrigation went catastrophically wrong, and the river broke free of its intended course, pouring uncontrolled into a low-lying basin in the desert. For a long period, the river poured into this basin, filling it with an enormous quantity of water, creating, entirely by accident, a vast inland sea where there had been only dry desert. When the breach was finally closed and the river returned to its course, the water it had poured into the basin remained, forming the Salton Sea, an accidental ocean in the middle of the desert. This accidental origin is the first of the sea's impossibilities, a great body of water created not by the slow work of nature, but by a sudden human blunder, a lake born of catastrophe that filled a desert basin almost overnight. But the strangeness did not end with its creation, because the accidental sea, once formed, took on a life of its own, becoming for a time a thriving and vibrant place. In the decades after its creation, the Salton Sea became an unlikely oasis, a recreational paradise in the desert, drawing visitors and residents, becoming a popular destination, its shores lined with communities and resorts. It became a vital habitat for birds, a crucial stop for migratory species, a place teeming with life. The accidental sea, against all odds, flourished, becoming a beloved and important feature of the region, a desert miracle that seemed to defy the harsh environment around it. But the very thing that made the Salton Sea possible also doomed it, because a sea with no natural source of water, sitting in a hot desert, faces an impossible predicament. The sea had no river to sustain it, no natural inflow to replace the water lost to the relentless desert evaporation. What kept it filled, after its accidental creation, was largely the runoff from the agriculture of the surrounding region, the water that drained from the irrigated fields into the basin. This agricultural runoff sustained the sea for a long time, keeping it filled even as the desert sun worked to evaporate it away. But this was always a precarious balance, a sea sustained by the byproduct of farming, and as the inflows have diminished, the balance has tipped, and the sea has begun to shrink, to evaporate away faster than it is replenished, entering a decline that threatens its very existence. And here is where the Salton Sea does something that truly shouldn't be possible, because as it shrinks, it becomes not less dangerous, but more, transforming from a dying lake into an active threat to the health of the entire region. This is the great paradox of the Salton Sea, the way that its decline unleashes dangers that a healthy lake would keep contained. As the water recedes, it exposes the lakebed, the ground that had lain beneath the water, and that exposed lakebed is not clean, harmless soil. Over the decades, the sea accumulated a burden of contaminants, the residues of the agricultural runoff that sustained it, the pesticides and the chemicals and the other substances that drained into it from the surrounding farms, along with the natural accumulation of salts and minerals. As long as the water covered this lakebed, these substances were trapped, contained beneath the surface. But as the sea shrinks and the lakebed is exposed, that contaminated sediment lies bare, dried by the desert sun, ready to be lifted by the wind. This is the impossible transformation, the way that a shrinking lake becomes a source of toxic dust. When the exposed lakebed dries out, it turns to a fine dust, and the desert winds, sweeping across the exposed playa, can lift that dust into the air, carrying clouds of fine, contaminated particles across the region. Because the area around the sea is home to communities, and because the region is already prone to poor air quality, this toxic dust becomes a serious threat to the health of the people who live there. The fine particulate matter, laden with the contaminants that accumulated in the lakebed, can be breathed deep into the lungs, causing and worsening respiratory problems and other health issues. The region around the Salton Sea already suffers from high rates of respiratory illness, and the growing source of toxic dust from the exposed lakebed threatens to make it far worse. The dying sea, in its decline, becomes a poison factory, its shrinking waters exposing an ever larger expanse of toxic dust that the winds carry into the lungs of the people nearby. This is the paradox that shouldn't be possible, a lake that becomes more dangerous as it disappears, a body of water whose death threatens the living far more than its life ever did. A healthy, full Salton Sea keeps the toxic sediment safely submerged, harmless beneath the water. But a shrinking, dying Salton Sea exposes that sediment, unleashing the toxic dust, so that the decline of the sea is a growing public health emergency for the region. This is the cruel logic of the dying sea, the way that its disappearance is not a gentle fading, but an active and worsening threat, a danger that grows with every foot the water recedes and every acre of lakebed that is exposed. It is a phenomenon that defies the intuition that a shrinking lake would simply become less significant, revealing instead that the death of the sea is a catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. But the impossibilities of the Salton Sea do not end with the toxic dust, because the shrinking sea also does something to itself that is strange and troubling, transforming its own waters in ways that destroy the life within it. As the sea evaporates and shrinks, the salts and minerals dissolved in its water become more and more concentrated. Because the water evaporates away, but the salts remain, so that the shrinking sea grows ever saltier. Over time, the sea has become intensely saline, far saltier than the ocean, and growing saltier still as it continues to shrink. This rising salinity has had a devastating effect on the life of the sea, because the fish and other organisms that once thrived in it cannot survive in water that has grown too salty. The sea that was once teeming with life, a vibrant habitat, and a crucial stop for migratory birds, has seen its ecosystem collapse as the water grew too salty to support the fish. And the collapse of the fish has cascaded through the food web, threatening the birds and the other life that depended on the sea. This ecological collapse is another of the sea's impossible transformations. The way that the accidental sea, which became an unlikely oasis of life, has turned into an environment increasingly hostile to the very life it once supported. The rising salinity is, in a sense, the sea poisoning itself, concentrating its own salts to levels that kill, so that the shrinking of the sea is not only a threat to the people around it through the toxic dust, but a catastrophe for the ecosystem within it. The loss of this habitat is a significant blow because the Salton Sea, for all its strange origin, had become a genuinely important place for wildlife, and its decline represents the loss of that habitat, another dimension of the disaster unfolding as the accidental sea dies. There is another strange and troubling phenomenon associated with the dying sea, one that assaults the senses and signals the depth of its distress. As the ecosystem collapses and the conditions in the water deteriorate, the sea has become prone to episodes in which it emits a powerful and unpleasant odor, a stench that can drift across the region and be noticed even far away. This smell arises from the biological and chemical processes occurring in the troubled waters, the decay and the changes in the oxygen-starved depths, which can release gases with a foul odor. When conditions align, the sea can belch these gases, sending a wave of stench across the surrounding area, a sensory reminder of the sea's decline that reaches people who may be far from its shores. This foul-smelling emission is another of the sea's strange behaviors, a body of water that not only poisons the air with dust and kills its own life with salt, but also periodically fills the region with an unpleasant odor, a further sign of the deep trouble the accidental sea is in. The decline of the Salton Sea is also written in the fate of the communities that once flourished on its shores, in the abandoned resorts and the faded towns that testify to what the sea once was and what it has become. In its heyday, the sea drew crowds and investment, and communities grew up along its shores to serve the visitors and to enjoy the desert oasis. But as the sea declined, as the water receded, and the salinity rose, and the fish died, and the shores were left dry and stained, the visitors stopped coming, the resorts closed, and the communities faded. Today, the shores of the sea are dotted with the remnants of this abandoned past, the decaying structures and the empty streets of places that were once vibrant, a haunting landscape of decline that stands as a monument to the sea's fall from paradise to catastrophe. This eerie landscape of abandonment is part of the strange character of the Salton Sea, a place where the ruins of a lost oasis line the shores of a dying sea, a vision of decline that adds to the sense that this is a place where something has gone profoundly and impossibly wrong. And now we come to perhaps the most surprising impossibility of all, because beneath and around this dying, toxic, hypersaline sea lies a treasure of enormous value, a resource that could be worth a fortune and that has drawn intense interest to this troubled place. The region of the Salton Sea holds significant deposits of a valuable mineral, one that has become extraordinarily important in the modern world, a key ingredient in the batteries that power the growing world of electric vehicles and energy storage. Beneath the surface, in the geothermal resources associated with the sea and its region, lies a store of this valuable mineral, and the prospect of extracting it has transformed the troubled Salton Sea into a place of enormous economic potential and interest. The dying sea, it turns out, sits atop a fortune, a resource that could be critical to the future of energy and transportation. The presence of this valuable mineral has given the Salton Sea a strange new significance, transforming it from a forgotten environmental disaster into a place of national and even global interest. In a world racing to build the batteries needed for electric vehicles and to store renewable energy, the demand for this mineral has soared, and secure domestic sources of it have become strategically important. The prospect that a significant supply could be drawn from the Salton Sea region has drawn companies and investment and attention, raising the possibility that this troubled place could become a major source of a resource critical to the modern economy. The dying sea that most of the country had forgotten has suddenly become a place that could matter enormously to the future, its geothermal brines holding a fortune that the world increasingly needs. It is a reversal of fortune that few could have imagined, the accidental sea, poisoning the air and killing its own life, revealed to be sitting atop one of the most sought-after resources of the age. This juxtaposition is the final impossibility, the way that a place of environmental catastrophe and public health crisis is also a place of immense economic opportunity and strategic importance. The Salton Sea is at once a dying lake, a source of toxic dust, a collapsing ecosystem, and a treasure trove of a critical mineral, a place where disaster and opportunity are strangely intertwined. The prospect of extracting the valuable mineral has brought new attention and investment to the region, raising the possibility that the economic activity could help to fund the efforts to address the environmental problems, or alternatively raising concerns about the environmental effects of the extraction itself. The Salton Sea has become a place where the future of clean energy meets the reality of environmental catastrophe, a place where a fortune in a critical mineral lies beneath a dying sea that is poisoning the air, a juxtaposition that seems almost too strange to be real. To understand the full significance of the Salton Sea's impossibilities, you have to appreciate the human stakes, the communities that live around the sea and that bear the consequences of its decline. The region around the Salton Sea is home to communities that are, in many cases, economically disadvantaged, and these communities are on the front lines of the crisis, bearing the brunt of the toxic dust and the health effects that come with it. The people who live near the sea suffer from high rates of respiratory illness, and the growing source of dust from the exposed lakebed threatens their health directly. These are the people who live with the impossible sea, who breathe its dust, who watch its decline, who bear the consequences of a disaster that they did not create and that they have limited power to address. Among them are many children, whose developing lungs are especially vulnerable to the dust, and the high rates of childhood respiratory illness in the region are a heartbreaking measure of the human cost of the sea's decline. The human dimension of the Salton Sea's crisis is a story of environmental injustice, of a vulnerable population bearing the burden of a catastrophe that unfolded through no fault of their own, watching a distant sea shrink and knowing that its retreat means more dust in the air their children breathe. And there is a bitter irony in the prospect that the wealth of the mineral beneath the sea could flow out of the region, while the people who live with the toxic dust see little benefit, unless the development is managed in a way that ensures they share in the gains. It is a crucial part of understanding what the dying sea means, that its heaviest burdens fall on those least able to bear them. The challenge of what to do about the Salton Sea is immense, because the problems are complex and interconnected, and there are no easy solutions. Restoring the sea to its former state would require an enormous quantity of water that the region, already facing water scarcity, cannot easily provide. Managing the exposed lakebed to control the dust requires significant effort and resources. Addressing the salinity and the ecological collapse presents its own challenges, and balancing the environmental crisis against the economic opportunity of the mineral extraction adds another layer of complexity. The efforts to address the Salton Sea's problems have been ongoing, but they face the difficult reality that the sea is caught in a web of competing demands and limited resources, and that the fundamental predicament, an accidental sea with no natural source of water, sitting in a hot desert, makes any lasting solution extraordinarily difficult. The impossible sea presents an impossible challenge, one that the region continues to grapple with. The story of the Salton Sea is, in the end, a story about the strange and often unintended consequences of human actions on the natural world, about the way that a place created by accident can take on a life of its own and then die in ways that threaten the living. The sea that shouldn't exist, born of a human blunder, became an unlikely oasis and is now dying in a way that unleashes toxic dust, collapses its own ecosystem, and reveals a fortune in a critical mineral, a cascade of impossibilities that make it one of the most extraordinary and troubling places in the country. It is a monument to the unintended consequences of human intervention, a place where a mistake became a sea, where the sea became a paradise, and where the paradise is becoming a poison. All in the span of a little over a century. The Salton Sea is doing something that shouldn't be possible, becoming more dangerous as it dies, poisoning the air as it shrinks, killing its own life as it concentrates its salts, and revealing a treasure as it declines. It is a place of paradox and contradiction, a dying sea that is also an economic opportunity, an environmental catastrophe that is also a strategic resource, a monument to human error that is also, potentially, a key to the clean energy future. To understand the Salton Sea is to confront the strange and sometimes impossible ways that human actions and natural forces intertwine, producing outcomes that no one intended and that defy easy understanding. The impossible sea sits in the desert, shrinking and poisoning and revealing its secrets. A warning and a wonder. A disaster and an opportunity, doing something that shouldn't be possible, and demanding, in its strange and troubling decline, that we pay attention to what it has to teach us about the consequences of what we do to the world around us. And so the great accidental sea continues its slow and troubling transformation, defying expectations at every turn. A body of water that should not exist doing things that should not be possible. Its decline is a crisis for the people who live around it, a catastrophe for the wildlife that depended on it, and a puzzle for those who must decide what to do about it. But it is also a mirror reflecting back to us the unintended consequences of our actions. The way that a mistake can grow into something vast and strange and consequential. The way that the choices we make about water and land and resources can ripple out in ways we never foresaw. The Salton Sea is a place unlike any other, and its impossible transformations are a reminder that the world is stranger and more interconnected than we often realize, and that the consequences of what